Hello and welcome to Historic History. Historic history is meant to teach people about the past and how events in the past affect us in the future. Our first topic is on the history of space exploration. In this video, you will be learning about early space history, the Cold War, after the Cold War, the technological advances, and space exploration today. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky was born in Russia in 1857. He was the first one to state that a rocket could work in the vacuum of space. He also designed a liquid hydrogen-oxygen rocket. He later passed away in 1935 at the age of 78. He was key to the start of an era of space discovery. Another person was American engineer Robert Goddard. He stated that liquid-fueled rockets are needed for traveling in space. He later built a liquid oxygen rocket and launched it from Massachusetts. Like Tsiolkovsky, his discoveries laid the groundwork for future space discovery missions. Later, German rocket engineer von Braun designed rockets for Nazi Germany, but the most famous rocket he ever designed was the V2 rocket, which stands for Vengeance 2. The V2 rockets are able to hit London in a couple of minutes. However, his plans for an even more powerful rocket came to an end when Nazi Germany was defeated in World War II. The Americans took the factory at Nord-Dawson, and the Russians captured the Baltic launch base. While von Braun's job as designing rockets came to an abrupt close, the Americans desperately wanted him to lead the American rocket program. He was chosen because of his skill and experience. Later in the US, he designed the Americans' first V2 rocket. Von Braun would later design more rockets for the US. In Russia, the Red Army had captured a lot of parts for V2 rockets, but they failed to capture von Braun and his expertise. So they later turned to Sergei Korolev. Sergei Korolev was a Russian space enthusiast and later designed his own rocket. However, he was later convicted as a criminal for false charges against him. This was because of Stalin's purges. He was later released and was asked to become the head of the Soviets' rocket program. He later designed and built Russia's first V2 rocket. He would later be responsible for the first satellite and man into space. However, his identity was kept a secret to the outside world. These previous events will later result in the space race between Russia and America. The space race was a period during the Cold War in which Russia and America competed for space superiority. The Cold War was a standoff between East, which is communist, and West, which is capitalist. During the Cold War, NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the Eastern Bloc nations of Eastern Europe and Russia were in a hostile state against each other. It became more hostile when Russia built a rocket that can carry a nuclear bomb to the US. This weapon is called the ICBM. In the space race, however, the Russians were taking the lead. They sent the first satellite into space, Sputnik 1, and the first human into space in the Vostok rocket. The first human in space is Yuri Gagarin. However, the Soviets failed to get to the moon. The Americans, on the other hand, were late in the space race. However, they did launch their first satellite, Explorer 1, and the first American into space in the Mercury capsule. The first American in space was Alan Shepard. Unlike the Soviets, the Americans were the first nation to land a man on the moon. The first person on the moon was Neil Armstrong. After that, the US considered that they won the space race. After this, the two nations weren't competing that much for personal glory. After the space race, the Americans started the development of the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle is a spacecraft that takes off as a rocket and glides back down to Earth as an airplane. The first commercially used space shuttle was Discovery. However, The Space Shuttle program came to an abrupt end in 2011 with the last flight of Space Shuttle Atlantis. The US has been developing a lot of things like satellites, telescopes, rovers, etc. But the most important thing that the US developed were space stations. While the US has been late in the game in the development of space stations, the US along with many other countries developed the International Space Station. The International Space Station is a space station used by many nations for scientific and research purposes. Speaking of research, there was a lot of technological advances during the period of space exploration which I will talk about next in. There have been a lot of technological advances during the era of space exploration. Let's start by talking about the V2 rocket. The V2 rocket is the start of modern rockets, and newer, more complex rockets evolved from the V2. The next rocket is the Juno 1. The Juno 1 was the rocket that carried Explorer 1 into space, and it has a slimmer design. Next, it is Sputnik 1, which was the first satellite in space. It featured a round design, and it is capable of transmitting a beep, beep, beep sound. After Sputnik, it is the Vostok rocket. The Vostok rocket was very revolutionary because it packs a lot of thrust in a 5-engine rocket. After that, it is the Space Shuttle, which was very technologically advanced because it can glide back down to Earth and land like an airplane. Finally, the last rocket I am going to show you is the Soyuz rocket. The Soyuz rocket is very comparable to the Vostok, but it packs a lot more thrust and power, and it is good for going to the International Space Station. Next, we will talk about how the continuation of technological advances will help in future and even current space travel in. Today, NASA is developing a new rocket called the SLS rocket. The SLS rocket is designed to go to Mars, and it features a launch abort system which can save the Orion capsule in case of a disaster. The rocket should be ready by the end of next year. Also, NASA wants to send the first human to Mars in about a decade, and I suspect that NASA wants to keep exploring beyond the solar system. That will wrap up this video today, and if you want to learn more about the history of space exploration, you can check out my website at https://sites.google.com. View history of space exploration, and as always, keep on exploring. Subscribe to the channel for more videos. Don't forget to drop a like on the video and give a comment of what other content from history do you want to see next. See you next time.